Good morning, and welcome to Talk of the Town on 99.7, 1450 WHTC and WHTC.com.
And we welcome you to Talk of the Town for this Monday, June 22nd. I'm Gary Stevens. We'll be open line following the 10 and 11 o'clock news blocks. We will be having Patty Vandenberg joining us in about an hour from now with What's New Around Holland. In our 10:30 segment, the fourth Monday of the month, we will be joined by State Representative Brad Slaw of Zeeland Township. But in our first half hour, we are joined by longtime Allegan County attorney, the man who would like to be the next prosecutor of Allegan County, Mike Villar. He's on the other end of our Zoom connection. Mike, good morning and welcome to WHTC's Talk of the Town.
Good morning, Gary. Glad to be here.
Glad you are with us, and we'll talk to Mike about his candidacy, some of the things that he is running on, some of the things he stands for, and we'll give you an opportunity to join us, not via the Zoom connection, but you can join us over the phone at 395-1450, 395-1450. Of course, the usual caveats that we have. One call per day, please, and we are on an 8-second delay, so please turn down your radio before you call, and we'll be able to have the conversation. You can ask Mike your questions. Mike, tell us a little bit about yourself. As I mentioned, a longtime Allegan County attorney. Tell us a little bit about, shall we say, some of your background, some of the reasons why you got the prerequisites to be the next prosecutor of Allegan County.
Well, I moved to Allegan in 1991 after graduating from University of Michigan Law School. I came to Allegan and I was a law clerk for Judge Corsilia for a year. After that, I went to the Michigan Court of Appeals and I was a law clerk there for another year. And after that year, I decided to start my own practice. Since that time, I have been operating and maintaining a private practice of law since '93. And in Allegan County, I've lived in the city of Allegan since that time. I bought a house in 1991. I raised 4 children here. Was coach of baseball, the ASO soccer, all those things. I was very involved in the community. I own some commercial buildings and I have tenants that I rent out to, commercial, both commercial and residential. I'm part of the Allegan Downtown Development Authority. So I've been very involved in Allegan and Allegan County for many, many years. And as an attorney, a private practice attorney for, gosh, I don't know, 27, 28 years. So it's been quite a while, and I'm very familiar with the system and the county, and that is part of why I'm running now, is because I'm concerned with what I've been seeing lately, and I think that it's time for change.
You mentioned being a practicing attorney, mostly criminal law, or a little criminal, a little civil?
Well, in a small town, it's very difficult to just do one thing or another. And a small town attorney is generally a general practice attorney. So I do divorce cases, custody cases, criminal cases, personal injury cases, car accidents. I do a wide range of practice, wills and trusts, and business law. So basically, you can't be it's hard to be a specialist in a small town. So we do a little bit of everything.
And of course, I need to ask this attorney question because people look at attorneys and they look at and see the image usually through the media, either through fictitious attorneys or maybe some of the more high-profile attorneys that we see that have problems with little, shall we say, little wings coming out of the air or things like that. Let's just put it this way. As a practicing attorney, some of the images that attorneys have, let's just say they're embellished by the media.
Well, everybody quotes the Shakespeare line, the first thing let's do, let's kill all the lawyers. And everybody thinks it's funny, and people laugh and joke about it. But in the context of that line, what it's saying is that lawyers are the ones who will resist change and resist any kind of oppression. So the first thing you do is you have to get rid of them. So I think we have a more noble profession than we are given credit for, because a lot of the times we're dealing with things that people really don't want to deal with. We deal with issues where, in my practice, if you're charged with a crime, you're in big trouble and you're having a crisis in your life. If you're going through a divorce, it's also a terrible time in your life. So we get to see people, kind of at their worst and try to help them through and get through things. Same thing with personal injury. So if you have a great personal injury case, that's a horrible accident for someone. So we deal with people that I think we sometimes get a little bit of a short shrift on that, because I think we deal with people that are in crisis. And for the most part, I think we try to help people navigate through some of the worst times of their lives.
Now, some of the things that do occur in the legal field sometimes gets, let's just say, dramatized a little bit too much or glossed over a little bit. Not every attorney can be a Raymond Burr and solve crimes, and be a detective instead of being a lawyer. A lot of times they are, they have to sort of say, my client got some problems and we got to try to strike the best deal possible, sort of in between Perry Mason and Law and Order in that regard.
Well, as many years as I watched Perry Mason, he never lost a case, and I can't say the same thing. And I think that's one of the big media, when people watch media, they think, oh, I'm going to get off on a technicality, or what kind of all the good lawyers get people off on technicalities. And in my 27 or 28 years of practice, that's very rare. Most of the time when a person comes in, my job is to find out what happened, advise my client of what's likely to happen. And the issue is not whether they're going to enter a plea generally. It's the issue is, what plea do you enter to? What's the appropriate punishment? And even when negotiating with the prosecutors, the negotiation is about what is the appropriate response to what my client did, as opposed to me saying, oh, there's a technicality and this guy's going to walk. That is something that very rarely happens. It happens a lot on TV, but not in real life. So most of the time, there's a realistic expectation. If you're a good attorney, you give your client a realistic expectation for a range of results, and then you try to get a result within that range.
Now, the other side of the aisle, and to a certain extent, and what you're looking for me is the next Allegan County prosecutor. Not all prosecutors are like the late Bill Tolman, the Detroiter who played Hamilton Berger in the Perry Mason series, where they tried to manipulate the system, stashing witnesses away so the defense can't get to and all that. That's from a different era. That's not what a prosecutor does these days.
Typically, it's not. A criminal defense attorney has an obligation to the client. And that is an absolute obligation. But a prosecutor has a different obligation. A prosecutor actually has their special ethical rules for a prosecutor, and they are obligated to seek justice. So they have an obligation not to take the case to trial if they know that they don't have probable cause or proof beyond a reasonable doubt. If they don't have that, they have an obligation not to take a case. In addition, they have an obligation to make sure that a defendant receives due process. In other words, the process against them has to be fair. So you can't hide witnesses. You can't hide evidence. You can't hide things from the defense that are, especially things that are exculpatory or tend to show that they're not guilty. You have to turn those things over to the defense attorney so that it's a fair trial. And that's what part of the role of a prosecutor is not just getting convictions, but it's being fair and not bringing cases that you can't win, and not bringing cases with evidence that you have manipulated or withheld.
And we're talking with Mike Villar, who is seeking to become the next Allegan County prosecutor. You have a question for Mike, he'll be happy to answer it at 395-1450, 395-1450. Your response to that last question sort of leads to part of the reason why you're running for the Allegan County Prosecutor's Office. You contend, and I'm going to quote from your webpage, which is votevillar.com.
I'm sorry, Gary, I don't mean to interrupt. It's Villar. So
okay, well,
Villar.
There's many different ways. That's all right. Correct me on that. We got Villar, VR, if you want to put the two L's together like they do in the Spanish pronunciation.
Well, and my dad was originally from Cuba, so it is a Spanish name.
Okay. Mike, tell us a little bit about what your major claim is and why, and I'm going to basically quote the headline, accountability is needed. And to a certain extent, Mike, your response to the last question sort of leads to one of the big things why you are running for prosecutor.
Right. Recently, there's several big issues. The first issue, and eventually I hope we talk about this, is that Allegan County felonies have increased by 52% over the last 3 years since Myrene Cook has become chief assistant prosecutor. And that's a big problem because that's a multi-million dollar problem that the county is facing, and I can explain that. But as far as integrity and accountability, I did a Freedom of Information Act request recently and received information from the county, which are now public records, of emails that were going between Judge Baker and Myrene Cook, the county prosecutor, and they were communicating during cases that were ongoing in front of Judge Baker. And they were called ex parte communications, which are communications. Whenever a judge talks to one side, they have to make sure the other side is aware of the communication. Otherwise, it's unethical. It's against the rule of judicial ethics, the canon of judicial ethics. So and judges have a duty to be fair and impartial. Prosecutors have a duty to make sure that a defendant receives due process. And so when you have a judge and a prosecutor talking about a case, and even specifics about a case that are ongoing, while in one instance, while the trial was going on, it's a huge problem. It's a huge ethical problem. And they weren't, usually we're supposed to self-report any kind of ethical dilemmas that we have or any kind of ethical quandaries that we get in. And those weren't self-reported. I had to find those emails, which were done on county computers and county email, which that is, those all become public records, and have a judge and a prosecutor kind of putting the thumb on the scale against someone is very problematic.
Now, some of this is, the things that you've mentioned against the current prosecutor right now, first-term prosecutor. Did that happen? And since you have some experience with Fred Anderson when he was the longtime prosecutor in Allegan County?
No, it never happened. As far as I'm aware, it was never even anything that I was concerned about. I think that Fred ran his office with integrity. It was an office that, well, you had good expectations. In fact, if you look at the prosecutors that Fred had over the years, they were basically people there that were there for their whole careers. I mean, that's where Marge Baker came from. That's where Rob Kingus came from. That's where Myron Cook. They were all hired by Fred Anderson, and they were all career-oriented people that wanted to maintain their careers in public service, either as a prosecutor or moving on to become a judge, but something in the public service sector. And interesting that you mentioned that, because since Myrene has been elevated to this position of prosecutor, there's been a turnover of 4 out of 9 attorneys, which is highly unusual. 4 very seasoned, experienced attorneys have left the office. That's about 45% turnover rate, which in my 28 years of practice here, that's absolutely unheard of. And they've been replaced by people that I think she's hired good people. I'm not denigrating any of the new attorneys, but they're young attorneys. So they don't have the experience. They don't have the wherewithal that whenever you lose a bunch of seasoned attorneys and replace them with newer attorneys, there's a learning curve. And during that learning curve, things don't go as well as they should. So I think that's another change that's happened.
We're talking with Mike Villar. And now you got me starting to think.
Sorry about that.
Mike Villar, who is the man who would like to become the next Allegan County Prosecutor. If you have a question for Mike, he'll be happy to answer it at 395-1450, 395-1450. I'm going to ask you a couple of things that are stated in your beginning part about the fact that the current Allegan County Prosecutor is manipulating the system for political gain. Why do you believe that this is a political gain issue more than maybe perhaps a financial issue? As you say, the Allegan County Prosecutor is costing taxpayers millions for what? And the question is, A, political gain, and B, can you put a dollar figure as to what you believe it's costing millions, as your campaign is saying?
Oh, absolutely. If you look back at the statistics, there's a Michigan caseload report that is part of the Supreme Court website of Michigan. Every county is mandated to report every crime that they charge, every case that goes through the court system. And those numbers are pretty much unassailable. And so when you look at those caseload reports, and they have criminal and civil caseload reports, they show how many felonies were bound over to circuit court in each county every year. So typically and traditionally between 2011, when they started keeping these caseload reports, and 2015, Allegan had between 500 and 600 felonies a year that were bound over to circuit court. In the last 2 years, we've had 1,009 in 2018 and 1,049 in 2019. These are felonies bound over to circuit court. Now, it's a long-winded explanation. They've gone up by 52% since Myrene has taken over. Allegan County has a population of 118,000, and we bound over 1,049 cases as felonies to circuit court. Ottawa County, for example, has 291,000 people. So they have 2.5 times more people than we do. And yet they only bound over 856 felonies to circuit court. So we almost are 200 felonies over a county that has 2.5 times our population. If you look at surrounding counties in the last 3 years, Van Buren's down 6%, St. Joseph County is down 25%, Ionia County is down 19.18% in terms of numbers of felonies being charged and moved over to circuit court. Ottawa County, over the last, since 2016, their number of felonies have gone up 1%. So what I'm seeing here is that Allegan has had this outrageous increase in felony charges. So what happens is all those felonies go into circuit court, and each one of those felonies take up time on the circuit court docket. So it crowds up the docket, and the docket gets behind and more behind and more behind. And so what happened in 2019 is Judge Baker requested that the Supreme Court Administrator's Office add a new judgeship to Allegan County. So if that would have been approved, and then the commissioners approved that as well, so you have a new judge that's going to be in Allegan County. Now, the two judges in Allegan County are currently former prosecutors. So who would have the inside track for the third judgeship? Would be Maureen Cook. And so at first when I said this, people said it sounded like a conspiracy theory, but now we have emails between the judge and the prosecutor which show that they are working kind of in tandem. So it's very, very troubling. In terms of cost, Allegan, we built a new jail, even though the voters didn't set it, turned it down twice, but we built it anyway at a cost of about $18 or $19 million. Our old jail had 163 beds. The new jail is approved for 225 beds. Prior to COVID, that jail was full. We were mandated to release people from the jail because it was full. Now, a prisoner costs about $42,000 a year to house. And generally, you only get about 8 to 10% of that back from the prisoners, even though they're supposed to pay that back. They rarely do. So just the increase from the old jail to have a capacity on this jail is about $2 million a year, $2.5 million. And if what I see is happening, eventually, if the number of felonies continue to be charged like they are, it's inevitable that the jail will be increased to 350 because that's what it was built to handle ultimately. It will be approved for 350. That would add $5 million a year every year. And eventually, with that number of felonies over and over and over, eventually there'll be a new judgeship, which usually costs $350,000 a year. Plus, you have to have a massive renovation of the county because you have to build another courtroom with all the security features. You have to have a court secretary, a court reporter. So there's a huge increase in financial obligations that we're headed for if we don't stop what's going on now.
395-1450. Let's get to a line that has somebody actually on it. Good morning. You're on the line with Mike Villar.
Hi. I was listening in, and I had a curious question. My parental rights, it was civil. They were completely stolen out of Allegan County. I went on to kind of go to school to understand what happened. And I'm wondering if this is kind of well known about the fraud or the deceit, if it extends over into the civil portion of court. And my attorney at the time was Judith Dock. And I was on camera saying to sign off parental rights voluntarily, and my kids could come home the same day, and I did. They stayed for 3 years until they went into Holland Christian School, and I found out I was no longer their mother. But because of the civil model of prisoner, and in prison and based in criminal court, they have a better chance of coming home and freedom than my kids ever do. So that was 2011. I filed a complaint. She was laid off or let go of the bar because she was depositing funds in her IOTA account at the same time that she accepted $850 from my children's father for the release of parental rights. My question is, I feel like this corruption or this unethical portion of Allegan County Court extends over not just in the criminal section, but over into the civil. And I also wonder how many other parents went through and had their rights stolen. And, is this a money-making kind of a kids for cash type deal that I've heard about? And so I just kind of would really respect the thoughts upon that I believe it's, to see what he would say. And I'm sorry I didn't catch his name all the way.
It's Mike Villar. Mike Villar, I should say. Mike
Villar. Sorry, I just broke in and I've been following this. I'm I'm so shocked. I even
Yeah.
contacted the Michigan State Police.
All right.
Um,
We'll see
Yeah.
we'll get Mike's thoughts. Thanks a lot for the call, Michael.
All right, so there's always a current. I do both criminal and civil law, and you have to be careful when you accuse a judge of something, accuse a judge of corruption, or other attorneys of corruption. You know, it's a very serious matter, and I wouldn't do that without any proof. So all I can say is that I have proof of a judge and a prosecutor engaged in communication that is, in my opinion, unethical and problematic. Even it could cause a problem for their license. So what you have to answer is, if a judge will do that with one person, are there other people that they would do that with? I don't know the answer, and I'm not going to suggest that. I am not aware of any other times that I believe that that's happened, and I certainly don't have any proof that that's happened. But I think that's part of the problem with when you violate the rules of ethics with one attorney. If you're a judge who talks to one attorney or a prosecuting attorney, then all of a sudden it raises the specter, that very issue that she raised is how do I trust the integrity of the court now that I've seen them act in a way that is unethical in criminal cases? Can you trust them in civil cases? And I guess that's a valid question. It's something that only Marge Baker could answer on that. And I have nothing to say that she's done that ever. I just know that she's done it in two instances with a prosecutor.
Got about a minute or so left, Mike, and I know this is going to be a little bit more loaded than perhaps we have time to go fully. But in light of what has happened over the last, basically 4 weeks or so since the incident in Minneapolis on Memorial Day, prosecutors, are they backing law enforcement? What's your stance on backing law enforcement in this day and age when basically law enforcement is under a little bit of assault?
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate. I think that I'm behind the police. I've worked with the police here in Allegan County for years, decades really. And the issues that I see as people talking about the law enforcement in other places, I haven't seen those issues here. And if those issues do arrive, they've been dealt with, and I think they've been dealt with fairly satisfactorily. Now, are there things that you can do to improve relations between the police and the community? There are always things that you can do to improve that, and that would be one of the things that I would look at doing, because in our community we haven't had that kind of unrest. We haven't had that kind of political unrest. But I think the thing is that once you see it, it's important to address it. It's important to bring in community involvement, get the input of the community. If there are things that need to be addressed, I know Frank Baker very well. I know a lot of the chiefs very well. I know Frank is someone who's entirely committed to making sure that community policing occurs and the police are a part of the community and not viewed as, he doesn't want them to be viewed as outsiders to the community. So I'm fairly happy with what we've done and what Frank's done and what a lot of the local chiefs have done.
He is Mike Villar. He is running for Allegan County Prosecutor as a Republican on the August 4th primary ballot. VoteVillar.com is his webpage. We'll put a link to that. We put the audio of this podcast with Mike Villar on our webpage at WHTC.com in a few moments. Mike, thank you very much for joining us today in the Zoom conversation. Look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. That's Mike Villar on 99.7 and 1450 WHTC. Coming up, it's CBS News with Peter King, followed by WHTC News with Peg McNichol. And then we'll have some open line time before Patty Vandenberg, what's new around Holland, and then another Zoom conversation with State Representative Brad Slaw at the bottom of the hour.